The desert of exile. Zalara's chest heaved with every shallow breath. The wind howled through the empty desert, carrying the faintest traces of dust that scratched at her raw, bleeding skin. Her body, once strong and proud, now felt like an unrecognizable heap of bruises and agony. The metal of her armor, dented and cracked, clung to her, a constant reminder of her failure. She had been abandoned. Left to die. The mission had gone wrong, catastrophically wrong. A strike against an enemy stronghold had gone awry, and instead of returning as the victorious warrior she was meant to be, she was here, alone in the unforgiving desert. Her people, the Cretheri, had a strict code: weakness was not tolerated. And when Zalara failed to destroy her target, they had decided she was no longer of use to them. So, they left her. Her eyes, blurry with the haze of exhaustion, scanned the barren landscape. The scorching sun beat down on her, but she barely noticed it anymore. She was numb, physically and emotionally. Her wounds bled, but she no longer had the strength to tend to them. She had no energy to fight for her survival. Just as Zalara's consciousness began to fade, a figure appeared on the horizon. The blur of movement was too far to be certain, but it was a person. A human, by the look of it. Zalara's heart skipped a beat, an odd mixture of dread and hope flooding her mind. She had heard of humans before, weak creatures, barely surviving in this hostile environment. But even a human might offer her a chance at life, however slim that might be. The figure grew closer, and Zalara tried to rise, to gather what was left of her strength to defend herself, but her body wouldn't obey. The figure loomed over her, and she could feel the warmth of their presence before her blurred vision focused enough to see a young man kneeling beside her. "By the gods, you're alive," he muttered, his voice soft but full of concern. Zalara could barely comprehend his words. Her vision swam in and out of focus, but she could see the man's face now, tanned skin, with a few streaks of dirt from his travel. His eyes were wide with compassion, a stark contrast to the coldness she had grown used to from her own people. He reached for her, his hands gentle as he began to assess her injuries. Despite the searing pain, Zalara felt something else, a flicker of something unfamiliar. Trust? No, it couldn't be trust. She was a warrior, and warriors didn't trust anyone, especially humans. "I'm Aiden," the man said, his voice calm. "I've been training to heal, to help people who end up in situations like this." Zalara's lips parted in a dry whisper. "You'll die," she rasped. "I will bring death." Aiden looked at her, then at her weapon, an alien blade she had barely been able to hold on to during her fall. He didn't recoil. He didn't run. Instead, he gave her a reassuring smile, as if her words were simply the ramblings of someone delirious. "No," Aiden replied softly, his voice unwavering. "I'm not afraid of you." Zalara's mind spun as the world around her blurred once more, her body giving up the fight. Before she succumbed to unconsciousness, she wondered, what would it feel like, to be saved by a human? Bonds of blood and healing. Zalara awoke to the soft, rhythmic sound of wind outside, its faint whisper brushing against the walls of what she assumed was some form of shelter. Her body felt strangely comfortable, warm and cared for, though the deep ache in her muscles and the burning sting of her wounds remained. Her first instinct was to reach for her weapon, but her hands were bound loosely to the bedpost. Her heart skipped a beat as panic began to set in, but before she could move, a calm voice broke through the silence. "Don't worry," Aiden's voice was gentle but firm. "You're safe here." Zalara's eyes shot open, taking in the room she was in. It was simple, a small, stone-walled space, lit by the dim glow of a flickering fire in the corner. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and something faintly floral. She could see Aiden sitting by a small table, his back to her as he carefully prepared something in a bowl. The rhythmic sound of mortar against pestle told her he was grinding something, likely medicinal. Her senses were sharp despite her weakness, and she could hear the distant hum of life beyond the walls, children's laughter, the clink of metal, the murmur of people conversing. She was inside a building, not out in the barren desert as she had been just hours before. But how? How had she gotten here? Aiden noticed her gaze and turned, his calm eyes meeting hers. Don't try to move too much yet. You've been out for a while, he said, standing and walking toward her with a tray of warm liquid in his hands. He held the bowl carefully, as though it might shatter in his palms, and placed it beside her on the makeshift bed. Zalara stared at it, then at him. I failed, she whispered hoarsely, her voice cracked and dry. I was left to die. Aiden's expression softened, and he gently touched her arm, careful not to hurt her further. I found you. I couldn't just leave you out there. Nobody should die alone in the desert, no matter who they are or where they come from. Zalara's lips parted in disbelief. She was an alien warrior, a tool of war, a cold instrument of her people's ruthless ways. And yet, this human had chosen to help her. She didn't know whether to be grateful or to distrust him. After all, no one in her past had ever shown such selfless compassion. What are you doing here? Zalara managed to ask. I'm a healer, Aiden said, his voice steady. I've been traveling for a while, trying to offer what help I can. I've spent years learning the art of healing, both physical and spiritual. Zalara frowned, confused. But you're human. Aiden smiled softly. Yes, I am. But even humans have the capacity for kindness. Zalara's mind swirled with the implications of his words. She had always seen humans as fragile beings, weak and insignificant compared to the warriors of her race. But here was one standing before her, giving without expectation, offering her a chance at survival. His presence felt like an anomaly in the harshness of the world she had known. You're not afraid of me, she muttered. No, Aiden replied. You don't seem like someone who would hurt me unless you had no choice. And I can see that you're not here to cause harm. You're lost, just like I was once. Zalara turned her head away, closing her eyes for a moment as a flood of conflicting emotions rushed through her. A failure. A pariah among her people. And yet, here was Aiden, a stranger, treating her with more care than she had ever received. She felt the weight of his touch, the tenderness of his actions, and it stirred something deep within her, a gnawing sense of vulnerability that she hadn't known how to process. Why? She finally asked, looking up at him. Why would you help me? You don't know who I am or what I've done. Aiden met her gaze, his expression thoughtful. I've seen people in pain before, Zalara. I've seen the way the world chews people up and spits them out. Sometimes, all someone needs is a chance to heal. Maybe that's what you need too. Her chest tightened at the mention of healing. Healing was something she had been trained to do for others, never for herself. It had been drilled into her from an early age that warriors like her were meant to endure, to suffer silently, and to never show weakness. But now, lying in this small room, she realized that Aiden was offering her something that no one else had, acceptance. She wasn't just an alien warrior to him. She wasn't just a weapon. She was a person. Over the next few days, Zalara's physical wounds began to heal, though her mind remained in turmoil. Aiden would sit with her, speaking softly of his travels, his life in the small village he had come from, and the many faces he had seen. He treated her with kindness, even when she remained distant, her eyes clouded with the memories of betrayal and loss. But there was something else growing in Zalara, something she couldn't ignore. A feeling she hadn't known in a long time, gratitude. And a strange, unexpected longing. The feeling of connection. The humans had once seemed beneath her. Now, Aiden was the one thing standing between her and complete despair. A beacon of hope in a world that had cast her aside. Still, Zalara fought against the emotions that were beginning to take root. She had been a warrior, and warriors did not have the luxury of emotion. They did not allow themselves to be vulnerable. But Aiden's care was undeniable, and it stirred something within her, a conflict between the cold walls of her upbringing and the warmth she now felt at the hands of this human healer. "I don't belong here," she said quietly one evening, as the sun began to set outside the small shelter. "I don't belong with humans." Aiden didn't look surprised by her words. He set down his bowl of herbs and turned to face her, his expression calm. "You belong wherever you choose to be, Zalara. If that's with us, then I will help you find your place here." Zalara's heart twisted in her chest. She knew Aiden's words were genuine, and yet, the idea of staying here, among these fragile humans, felt like a betrayal to everything she had been trained to be. How could she reconcile her duty with the tenderness that Aiden had shown her? How could she protect him and the others when her people would never forgive her for what she had become? Aiden's hand reached out, steady and unflinching. "You don't have to make any decisions now. Just rest. Heal. And when you're ready, we'll figure out what comes next." Zalara looked at his hand, then into his eyes. For the first time since she had been abandoned, she wondered if there was another way, if there was a life for her beyond the battlefield. But the answer was far from clear. Shadows of the past. The nights had become Zalara's battleground. The quiet of the desert outside the shelter only amplified the turmoil that churned within her. As her physical strength returned, so too did the memories of her betrayal. The cold, calculating faces of her Crethry comrades haunted her dreams, the voices of her superiors echoing in her mind, reminding her of her failure. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of her commander, Terran, who had been the first to turn away from her, abandoning her to die as the mission crumbled. She had been the one they trusted, the one they depended on. And now, she was nothing, a discarded tool. A shadow. But the kindness of Aiden's presence gnawed at her, refusing to let her forget what it meant to feel. To feel cared for. To feel wanted. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had made her feel human, let alone hopeful. One evening, as Zalara stood at the small window of the shelter, gazing out over the vast, empty stretch of the desert, a loud knock on the door startled her. She turned to Aiden, who had been reading by the fire. He set the book down and stood quickly, walking to the door. "Who could that be at this hour?" he murmured, more to himself than to Zalara. The door swung open, revealing a tall woman, her dark hair braided tightly against her scalp, with the hardened gaze of someone who had seen war up close. She was dressed in worn leather armor, her expression tense but determined. "Aiden," the woman said, her voice firm and commanding. "I need your help." Zalara watched from across the room as Aiden stepped aside to let the woman in. There was a familiarity in the way they spoke, an unspoken connection that made Zalara's heart tighten. But her attention was drawn to the woman's gaze, which swept across the room and immediately locked onto Zalara. Her eyes narrowed, and Zalara instinctively tensed. The woman spoke again, this time her tone softer but with the same underlying authority. "You found her. I didn't expect that. But I'm not surprised. You've always been a healer, Aiden. Even in times like these." Zalara's mind raced. Who was this woman? Why did she look at her as though she already knew her? And why had she come? "I couldn't just leave her," Aiden said, stepping closer to Zalara. He seemed to sense her discomfort, his voice softening. "Zalara is, not what you think." The woman's gaze flickered briefly to Aiden before returning to Zalara. "She's Crethry. I know what she is." Her words came out with a slight edge, the recognition clear in her tone. "And I also know what they did to her." Zalara's pulse quickened. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to escape this woman's gaze, but she was frozen, rooted to the spot. How did she know about her? How much did she know? The woman moved closer, her eyes never leaving Zalara. "I'm Leora," she said, her voice growing softer as she took in the alien's appearance, the visible scars, the traces of her once gleaming armor now tarnished by the desert. "I lead a group of rebels fighting against the Crethry. You're one of them, aren't you?" The words hung in the air like a threat. Zalara's heart raced, her throat tightening. This was it. This was the moment she feared, the moment when her past would finally catch up with her. Aiden had been kind, but how would he react when he learned the full truth of who she was? What she had done. What she was capable of. She looked at Aiden, her eyes filled with silent desperation. He was still standing by her side, looking between her and Leora, as though he had expected this confrontation. I didn't know what I was bringing into my home, Leora, Aiden said softly, his voice steady. But I'm not afraid of her. Leora took a step closer to Zalara, her gaze piercing but not hostile. You should be, Aiden. This isn't just about you or your village anymore. The Crethari don't forget betrayal. They never forgive failure. And you, she turned to Zalara, her voice cold now. You are their greatest shame. Zalara clenched her fists, feeling the weight of Leora's words. She had failed the Crethari, but to hear it spoken aloud, to have her very identity reduced to shame, it felt like another betrayal. I'm not their tool anymore, Zalara said quietly, her voice hoarse, as though saying the words out loud would somehow make them real. I'm not a warrior for them. I'm just trying to survive. Leora didn't respond immediately, her eyes studying Zalara as if trying to weigh her sincerity. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer but still tinged with skepticism. You have no idea what you're asking, do you? You're not safe here. You think the Crethari won't come for you? For us? They'll burn this entire village to the ground if it means finding you. Zalara could feel the tension between them, the weight of her past pulling at her like chains. She had no idea what Leora expected from her, or even what she expected from herself. She had failed. She had been discarded. And now, here she was, standing in front of a human, a healer who had shown her kindness, and a rebel leader who seemed to view her as nothing more than a weapon to be used against the Crethari. Please, Zalara said, her voice trembling for the first time. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it. Aiden's hand reached out again, gently resting on her shoulder. You're not alone, Zalara. Not anymore. Leora turned sharply, her expression hardening. This isn't some simple life you're asking for. Once you take a side, there's no turning back. You can't walk away from this. Zalara looked down at the floor, fighting back the surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had spent her entire life following orders, performing the will of her superiors. But now, with Aiden's steady presence beside her and Leora's harsh truths weighing down on her, she began to wonder if there was a different path for her. If it was possible to leave the war behind. Tell me what I can do, Zalara said, her voice steady but resolute. Tell me what you need. I will fight. Aiden's hand tightened on her shoulder, his fingers warm against her skin. Zalara, you don't have to. But Zalara cut him off, her voice fierce. I can't hide forever, Aiden. I can't run. I have to face what I've done. I have to make it right. Leora watched her closely, then nodded, as if seeing something in Zalara she hadn't expected. Then you'll have to fight, just like the rest of us. Welcome to the rebellion. Warrior's choice. The village was on edge. It had been days since Leora's arrival, and the air felt heavier with every passing hour. The threat of the Crethari growing closer loomed over them like a storm, and everyone in the village could sense it. There was no time for preparation, they were already too late. The Crethari were coming. Zalara could feel it, too. Despite the physical wounds she had endured, the scars on her soul were deeper, more pervasive. Her mind had always been sharp, always focused on the mission. But here, surrounded by people she had once considered weak, everything was different. The choice before her was the hardest she had ever faced: stay with the humans and help them fight, or return to the Crethari and attempt to redeem herself, if that was even possible. Aiden had been with her every step of the way since Leora's arrival. Though he never said much, Zalara could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had never been part of any war, never lived a life where survival meant fighting with every ounce of strength. And now, the very world he had built in the safety of his village was at risk because of her, because of who she was, and what she had once been. Sitting outside the shelter that had become her refuge, Zalara looked out across the desert landscape, her eyes tracing the outlines of distant hills, where she knew the Crethari forces were gathering. They were close, too close. Leora had gathered the village's defenses, making plans to fight back. The villagers, frightened but determined, were already preparing weapons, while the children were being moved to the deeper caves for safety. But Zalara's mind was elsewhere. She had been trained to fight. To kill. To destroy anything that stood in her way. But now, in this moment, she was faced with a different kind of fight, the battle for her own soul. Zalara, Aiden's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing just inside the doorway of the shelter, his brow furrowed in concern. You've been out here for hours. You need to rest. She shook her head, her gaze never leaving the horizon. I can't rest, Aiden. I can't hide anymore. Aiden approached her, stepping lightly in the soft sand. His hand rested on her shoulder as he crouched down beside her, a gentle touch that sent warmth through her despite the coldness that had settled in her heart. You're not hiding, he said quietly. You're just figuring things out. I understand. This is all so much for you to handle. Zalara's throat tightened at the sincerity in his voice, but she didn't look at him. Not yet. She had to make her choice. She had to decide what she was going to do with her life, now that she had a choice. I failed them, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was the one they trusted, the one they sent to destroy. And now, they want me back, Aiden. They want me to finish what I started, to redeem myself. Aiden's hand tightened on her shoulder. But you're not that person anymore, Zalara. You're not just a weapon. You're more than that. I don't know how to be anything else, she replied, her voice cracking. I've been a soldier my entire life. I don't know how to stop fighting. But I also don't know how to keep fighting if it means destroying the very people who saved me. Aiden remained silent for a moment, as though choosing his words carefully. I can't pretend to understand what you're going through. But I know that you've changed. You're not the same woman who first came into this village, bleeding and broken. You've been healing, not just physically, but emotionally. And you've helped us. You've fought for us, in your own way. Zalara met his gaze then, her eyes wide with confusion. I've done nothing but bring danger to you. The Crethari won't stop until they have me. I've already endangered everyone here by being alive. Aiden shook his head slowly, his expression firm. That's not true. You've given us something we didn't have before. You've given us hope. Zalara closed her eyes, her emotions swirling inside her like a storm. Hope. It was such a fragile thing, something she had never believed in before. She had always seen the world through the lens of survival, of winning at all costs. But Aiden had shown her something different, a chance to live, to be more than just a tool of war. But the call of her past was powerful. The Crethari didn't just let go of their own. They didn't forget betrayal. And her commander, Terran, had made it clear, either she would return to them, or she would die. The sound of footsteps approaching caught Zalara's attention, and she looked up to see Leora striding toward them, her face grim but determined. The Crethari are less than a day away, Leora said without preamble. We can't hold them off with just the villagers. We need every fighter we can get. Zalara stood, her body stiff with resolve. I'll fight, she said, her voice low but unwavering. I won't run anymore. Aiden's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't try to stop her. Instead, he reached for her, his fingers brushing against hers in a silent plea. Zalara, no. You don't have to do this. You don't have to fight for them. Zalara met his gaze, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. If I don't fight, I'll never escape my past. I'll always be that warrior, that weapon, that failure. But if I stand with you, with them, she turned to Leora, her voice steady now. Then maybe I can stop running. Maybe I can finally choose what kind of person I want to be. Leora studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. Then we fight together. Zalara looked at Aiden, his face a mixture of fear and pride. I don't know if I'm making the right choice. But I have to try. Aiden took her hand, his grip firm and steady. Then I'll stand by you, Zalara. No matter what. The night stretched on as the villagers prepared for battle. Zalara, though filled with doubt, found a new sense of purpose, one that had nothing to do with her Crethary heritage and everything to do with her future. As she stood side by side with Aiden, Leora, and the others, she realized that the fight ahead wasn't just for survival. It was for redemption. The final stand. The sky was a deep purple when the first dust storm kicked up, swirling sand and dirt through the air like an omen. The village, nestled against the foothills of a jagged mountain range, had become a makeshift fortress. Barricades were hastily erected, the defenses set as best they could be. But Zalara, standing among the villagers as they prepared for battle, knew it wouldn't be enough. The Crethary were ruthless, well-trained, and efficient. They would take this village without hesitation, burning it to the ground if that's what it took. And they were coming for her. Her heart raced as she surveyed the others, the people who had taken her in, who had trusted her when she hadn't deserved it. Aiden stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, his eyes dark with worry. Leora was with them too, barking orders to the villagers, her voice cutting through the growing tension. The rebels had made their stand, and they would hold their ground, no matter the cost. But it was Zalara who felt the weight of the battle more than anyone. The battle not just for the survival of these people, but for her own identity. For her own redemption. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she whispered to Aiden, her voice low, the dust swirling around them. Aiden turned to her, his face hardening in determination. You don't have to be ready, Zalara. You just have to fight. And you've already shown us what you can do. Zalara looked into his eyes, searching for the reassurance she desperately needed. His words were kind, but they didn't stop the terror in her chest. The terror of failing again. Of seeing the villagers, her newfound family, fall at the hands of the Crethary. Leora approached, her face grim, but there was a fire in her eyes. The Crethary will come from the east, she said. We'll hold the western entrance, and we'll need every fighter we have. Zalara, you'll take the northern wall with me. Aiden, you stay with the main group. Keep the villagers safe. Zalara nodded, her pulse racing. The weight of her weapon on her back felt heavier than ever before, but she was determined to face this battle head-on. She couldn't hide anymore. She couldn't run. As the night stretched on, the tension in the air grew thick. The villagers huddled in their designated positions, their faces tense, some of them trembling. They weren't soldiers, they were farmers, builders, healers. But they had come together to protect their home, and they would fight to the last breath. The first scream rang out in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of war drums. The Crethary were close. Zalara's heart skipped a beat, but she steeled herself. She had been born for this moment, trained for this very thing. She was a warrior, and she would not falter. She would not fail these people. Leora gave her a quick, reassuring nod as she turned to lead the charge at the northern wall. Zalara followed close behind, her mind sharpened, her body primed for battle. The enemy came from the shadows, moving with deadly precision. Crethary soldiers, tall, imposing figures in black armor, emerged from the desert like phantoms. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, their weapons drawn, ready to spill blood. Hold the line. Leora shouted, raising her blade high. Zalara stood beside her, her hands gripping the hilt of her own sword. She could feel the cold metal against her palms, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like home. It was what she had been trained for, this fight. This war. The first wave of Crethari soldiers charged, and the battle began in a deafening roar of metal clashing, cries of fury and fear filling the air. Zalara swung her sword with precision, her movements fluid despite the chaos. She was no longer the broken, discarded warrior who had been abandoned in the desert. She was a force, a shield for these people, and she would protect them. She fought with a fury that even surprised herself, each strike calculated, each movement designed to incapacitate her enemies without hesitation. But with every Crethari soldier she struck down, the gnawing question returned, was she truly fighting for the right cause? Could she, in the midst of all this bloodshed, find redemption? Focus, Zalara. Leora's voice cut through her thoughts, and Zalara snapped back into the present. The battle wasn't over. She couldn't afford to be distracted. As the Crethari pushed forward, it became clear that the village's defenses wouldn't hold for much longer. The Crethari were relentless, and the villagers, though brave, were outmatched. The eastern wall had already fallen, and the remaining soldiers were retreating back into the heart of the village, trying to regroup. Zalara's eyes darted across the battlefield, looking for Aiden. She saw him in the distance, surrounded by villagers as they made their way toward the underground tunnels. His face was set in determination, but the fear was evident in his eyes. He wasn't a fighter, not like her, not like Leora, but he was still here, still fighting for them all. A roar cut through the air as a large Crethari warrior charged at Zalara, his eyes burning with hatred. Zalara raised her sword just in time, meeting the blow with a sharp clash of steel. The warrior grinned, his teeth bared, and lunged again. His strength was immense, and for a moment, Zalara struggled to hold her ground. But then something inside her snapped, something deep, something primal. She fought harder, faster, her blade a blur as it sliced through the air. With a final, powerful swing, she struck him down, the weight of his body crashing to the ground at her feet. She didn't pause to catch her breath. She couldn't. The Crethari were closing in, and Zalara knew that if they didn't make their stand here, the village would fall. But then, through the chaos, a sudden cry rang out, sharp and chilling. Aiden's voice, calling for help. Zalara's heart stopped. She turned to see him, struggling against a Crethari soldier who had grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Aiden! Zalara shouted, her voice raw with fear. Without thinking, she charged toward him, her sword raised high, cutting through the chaos. Time slowed as she closed the distance between them, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't lose him. Not after everything. With a final, desperate cry, Zalara drove her sword into the Crethari soldier's back, his grip on Aiden faltering as he collapsed to the ground. Aiden dropped to the earth, gasping for air, his face pale but alive. Are you okay? Zalara asked, kneeling beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. He nodded, though his face was filled with pain. I'm fine. Just, keep fighting. Zalara helped him to his feet, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The fight wasn't over yet, but with Aiden safe and the village still standing, she knew they had a chance. Let's finish this, Zalara said, her voice filled with resolve. Together, they fought side by side, pushing back the Crethari forces, refusing to let them take the village. Zalara's heart pounded, her body exhausted, but she fought like a woman reborn, no longer a weapon, no longer a slave to her past. She fought for the people she had come to love, for the future she now believed in. When the last Crethari soldier fell, the battlefield fell silent. The village, though scarred and battered, had held. And for the first time in Zalara's life, she allowed herself to believe in something greater than herself. She had found her redemption not through words or promises, but through action, through the choice to fight for something more than just survival. As dawn's light broke over the horizon, Zalara stood tall, the weight of her weapon no longer a burden, but a symbol of her new path. She had fought. And she had chosen. And she would never be the same again.